Today we're going to discuss enhanced screen sharing using Virtual Display Manager, a project that I was working on for quite a few years. And first we're going to look into existing screen sharing applications like Microsoft Teams, Zoom, WebEx, GoToMeeting, and so forth. So there are quite a few common features among those screen sharing options. The most notable one is the monitor sharing, often called screen sharing. You can also quite commonly share the entire desktop. It is also quite frequent to find application window sharing capabilities, and we'll discuss why those were introduced alongside monitor and desktop sharing. There's also whiteboarding. We're not going to be talking about it today, but this is a very common feature. What we'll do, though, we will focus on both monitor and desktop sharing along application window sharing and how can we enhance those using virtual display techniques that we have. Monitor and desktop sharing. What are the advantages? The advantage is simplicity. You share your monitor and your audience can see pretty much what's in front of you for the most part. You share a desktop, you can actually share multiple monitors at the same time, giving your audience more real estate to see, or maybe your presentation actually requires that. However, there are quite a few challenges. The first one is actually screen form factor. If we do have nice, landscape monitor, it will not be very conducive to display it on a traditional 4x3 monitors that our audience might have. Another common complaint is monitor resolution. So if we did get, let's say, 8K monitor, and yes, we can share it across the wire with our audiences, our audience might not have ability to actually show on their screens high fidelity images. Things actually can get quite blurry, and that presentation will not be very effective just because of the discrepancy in monitor resolutions. Now, when we do share a monitor, let's say we have just one monitor, maybe the entire desktop, the real estate becomes an issue because we cannot have our notes displayed to us, all right, because we're pretty much broadcasting our one and only, let's say, monitor. From that perspective, quite often we'll be compelled to use another computer or maybe a tablet to keep things on track. So anyway, so those were some challenges, and let's take a look at application window sharing. So one of the advantages that application window sharing introduced is that we're not compelled to share our entire desktop. We can actually limit the context to one window only, or maybe a couple windows for one particular application. Sharing picture quality can also improve because, again, it depends on application sharing, nature of application sharing application. But for the most part, if we just share a window, our audience will see the pretty much the form factor of the window we're sharing, which will most likely go full screen for the audience. So thus, we can actually use 8K monitors, still show high fidelity images as long as those application windows are kind of much smaller than our native resolution and they, let's say, project well to our audience's screens. There are challenges, however, and one of them is actually being quite cumbersome, as the interruption of screen sharing is usually required if we decide to switch to another window. There is also a possibility of unintended closing of shared window when we decide to close a particular window for the application while we're sharing multiple windows that belong to that app. And the sharing process can actually get interrupted because our first window that was shared was closed. Not all windows can be shared. That's actually not that rare. When we open, for example, Microsoft Teams and are looking for application to share, depending on how that application presents ourselves, that application might not be actually on the roster to choose from. And then application sharing can cause unintentional sharing of all the windows that belong to that application, because if we don't anticipate there will be a dialog popping up that belongs to the application that we're sharing right now as far as Windows is concerned. So we can see some unintended consequences, some other applications, maybe with confidential information, that will come across just because we're sharing that window. What's so novel about virtual displays? So actually, here's a picture of an office that was outfitted with a few monitors and actual virtual displays. So each monitor is split in a few virtual displays that act as an individual monitors. Let's take a look. One of the aspects of virtual displays, because they present virtual, basically teleconferencing packages with ability to show just a portion of the screen, is an ability to show just the area we need to share, and we can switch between those areas without dropping any sessions. And that will happen at the time when our resolution can be custom fit to the resolution and the form factor of the audience. Another interesting element of dealing with virtual displays from perspective of screen sharing packages is so-called multi-view capability, which is commonly found with broadcast applications, where presenter quite often can see, or actually the operator that is controlling the broadcast can see what is there on the screen right now, what is there to come, and things can be pre-staged. So when we have a complex presentation, we need to show this screen, that application, then another screen. We can easily pre-stage virtual displays where we show, let's say, virtual display 1 for the beginning of the presentation, and at some point we can switch to virtual display number 2 and so forth with a different material within those screens. Another aspect of virtual display sharing is, unlike sharing, let's say, an application, and I will show during the demo what can happen if you have application windows overlapping our shared application window. We will show everything that's within that quadrant or within that virtual display that we are broadcasting to our audience. So in other words, we don't need to worry about that, well, we shared this window, but another window did not come across, or maybe something overlaps our window. We see everything fine, but our audience has pretty much part of the screen grayed out and so forth. Something that is not directly related to virtual displays, but was kind of a nice introduction to this concept, is ability to have incognito mode per window. In other words, if we are showing a virtual display, it will be nice to be able to hide the window, even if we accidentally move it towards the area that we're broadcasting, hide it from the audience for the time of the presentation, or maybe turn that window on and off, so we can see it as presenters, but not necessarily our audience. There's also capability to white and blacklist applications. So in other words, if we blacklist a notepad because it's known to have confidential content in it, so we can actually automate the process, so we don't need to be paranoid of turning things on and off ourselves. The window becomes invisible in case it's shared or broadcast. As far as the entire monitor broadcast is concerned, it can be shared with the world, but it will be invisible. So in other words, our audience will never see that window that was, let's say, blacklisted. For this demonstration, I'm going to use two computers, one of them with a blue background that will be used to broadcast either full desktop application or a virtual display, and the second one with an orange background. And as you can see, Microsoft Teams is already running. We will see what comes across the wire and take a look at different experiences that we might have depending on the sharing that we elect for our application. So first, let's share our monitor. And as you can see, everything works as intended. Pretty much our entire desktop in this particular case, because we have only one monitor, is visible to our audience. If we do have notes, if we have to pre-stage another part of the presentation somehow during us talking to the audience, single monitor is definitely a limitation. So as far as notes are concerned, we can use a tablet, maybe another computer. But as far as another part of the presentation, maybe we need to launch an application, pre-stage it before we show it to the audience. We'll probably be switching back and forth so we don't expose our audience to the kitchen of us kind of making things work. And this is a clear limitation of dealing with one monitor only. So if we launch an application, let's say Notepad, let's type something into it. For monitors with a similar resolution, small details actually not an issue because pixel density is similar and Notepad will be actually quite well represented on the other end of the wire. However, if our original monitor was at high resolution, all of a sudden the limited area, limited number of pixels devoted to that particular application may be a challenge for our audience because they don't have high resolution monitors. So this is where most likely we'll have to switch to application sharing. Let's find our Notepad. And here we go. So the red border signifies that we're sharing Notepad. And yes, Notepad is visible for our audience. And by the way, it's pretty much independent from the original resolution. So we can comply with the needs of our users where they can actually see Notepad in high fidelity, even the screen resolution, let's say, is much smaller, worse than ours. Okay. If we open another window for this application, let's say, for example, I decide to save this Notepad. Notice that the dialog that popped up is actually cropped, right? So this is kind of a limitation for the shared window because we are not showing multiple windows at the same time. Different screen sharing packages deal with it differently. Some of them actually will show all the windows, but this is something to expect so that the cropping can potentially occur, okay? Another challenge is that if we do close application window that was originally shared, we can inadvertently drop sharing altogether because other windows will not be shared anymore since we keyed our remote presentation on that particular window, right? So if we kill it, well, other windows for that application will not be shown to the audience. So we'll probably be better off switching to a full monitor, okay? Now let's launch another app, let's say Task Manager. And yep, we don't see Task Manager coming across again. It's a very common feature where when you share a particular application, other applications are not necessarily visible, even if they are on top of your app, right? Which is kind of a nice feature. Let's do this. Let's keep our Notepad going. Stop screen sharing for the Notepad. And what we're going to do, we're going to enable virtual displays on this machine. So I have Virtual Display Manager installed. So in this particular case, we're splitting our screen in a couple quadrants. So let's demonstrate that. Okay, so let's see. If we need to identify our physical monitors, here we are. So we have only one physical monitor. And let's take a look at virtual displays. So we do have 1, 2, 3, and 4 virtual displays. Okay. Now let's prep our machine for display sharing. So right now we have display 3 available for sharing. And by the way, if we go to so-called manual mode, we can enable every single monitor to be shared pretty much simultaneously. So it's kind of up to you how you like to do it. As far as switching between virtual displays, actually selecting individual display is a bad idea because then what you can do is similar to broadcast situations where people use multi-view. You can actually pre-stage your different quadrants and then switch from, let's say, monitor 3 to monitor 4, monitor 2, and so forth, right? Without dropping a session. And this is what exactly I'm going to demonstrate right now. All right, so everything is set up. And what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to share my display number 3. As you can see here, it shows up as display number 3. If we enable, again, sharing in manual mode, all displays will show up, but in this particular case, we're just sharing one quadrant. So take a look, pretty much similar situation to sharing a Notepad. The main actually difference is the fact that if we do drag something into that quadrant, let's say now Notepad, Task Manager, here we go. So we will have pretty much whatever shows up in that quadrant broadcast to our audience. Also notice that if your screen was at much higher resolution, maybe it was a landscape monitor, which is hard to show during screen sharing, because everybody else might have, let's say, 4:3 monitors in front of them. So here we can actually show a portion of the screen, and our pixel density can be conducive to display on low resolution monitors that our audience might have. Okay. All right. Now, if we decide, let's say, maybe we'll put Task Manager here, or maybe let's run another application. Let's see. We have an application called Screen Marker, and what it can do, it can pretty much open different pictures on the screen. So we have banana, and looks like we have an apple, right? So let's maximize them. So what will happen right now, since banana is over Notepad, right? We don't see the Notepad, right? So banana will be our presentation here, okay? So if we decided to switch from bananas to apples, right? How do we do that? Well, we can potentially go to Microsoft Teams, select another application. Oh, and by the way, you might find out that not all applications show on the roster of available apps for sharing, right? But we actually will go to our virtual display manager. And the only thing we need to do, we need to switch which display we're sharing right now. Let's share display number 4. So what we expect right now, we expect Apple to come across and also our notification about Microsoft Teams. So here we go. So if we need to switch back to bananas, which are on display number 3, here we go. We have bananas, right? No session was dropped, and if we have complex presentation that requires multiple windows from multiple applications, you can do that. Now, as we did show before with application sharing, what was nice about application sharing is our task manager, that let's say maybe that's not the application we'd like to show to our end users, were not showing up when we actually did not want it to show up, because we were sharing a notepad and task manager was not on the list, and task manager was kind of transparent to our audience. In this particular case, you can see the task manager actually is clearly visible. Well, we have a solution for that. And solution for that is actually to switch application and task manager included into so-called incognito mode. So here's the switch. Here, pretty much there's no difference, right? We can see as a presenter our task manager. However, our audience does not see it anymore, right? Audience can see only bananas. Now, if we decide to switch from bananas to apples, okay, let's make sure our task manager does not get in the way. Let's say display 4. Notice that we switched to Apple, but there is no task manager because task manager is invisible for the audience. By the way, this feature can be interactive, or you can actually blacklist applications that pretty much will never be visible during window sharing or desktop sharing, right? So in other words, if you launch, let's say, Notepad, and Notepad was on the blacklist, you don't need to worry that Notepad will show on the screen because it will be invisible automatically. Let's switch our task manager back from incognito mode to normal mode. And as you can see, it's visible. So if we go back to our bananas, okay, let's get out of the way. Bananas are on display number 3. You can see task manager is sticking across the border here, and it is visible. So in other words, we have the best of both worlds. Of the shared desktop, right, where we can see everything. We can see pretty much at high resolution, low resolution, whatever the form factor you select for virtual display. You can work without a need for multiple monitors. You can actually get away with a single monitor. As long as you have decent resolution, you can split it into quadrants, or maybe a more sophisticated configuration. And you can switch between virtual displays during your presentation. And you can also hide, let's say you have a confidential application or application that you don't want your audience to see. You can actually hide those apps as well. By the way, the incognito mode also works with shadowing. So if you do use Microsoft shadowing, Citrix shadowing, any other technique, like, for example, you're mirroring the monitor with some third-party tool, in 95% of the cases, nothing will come across. It's definitely the case for Microsoft native screen shadowing, session shadowing is the case for Citrix. You might find situations where there is a possibility, let's say, through hardware-based gear to actually see what's happening on the screen, because you're mirroring the monitor through some broadcast device that outputs a HDMI output. But other than that, that feature is actually pretty solid based on Microsoft native APIs. Thank you so much. So again, if anybody is interested, Virtual Display Manager is available, and give it a shot.